Okay, so ready for chapter 6? Chapter 6 is called The Woman in the Silver Scarf. As soon as I got to the bus stop the next day, I told Josie and Tom and Michael everything that my mum had told me about refugee kids and about how the new boy had probably had to get on a boat with no toilets on it so that he could run away from the bombs and all the other bad things that the bullies had done to his country. But my dad said refugee kids are dangerous and that they lie and steal things, said Josie, looking confused. He told me to stay away from the new boy and not to talk to him because he was probably a criminal. But my mum and dad said we should be extra nice to him. Look. And opening up his rucksack, Tom showed us a big bag of sweets. Mum said to give these to him at lunchtime and she said we had to be nice to him and not to ask too many questions. My mum said the same, said Michael, and we got on the bus to school. Except she told me to give him a banana. And my dad said refugee kids were running away from the wars that's on the television all the time. He didn't say anything about any bullies. We all looked over at Josie, who was chewing on the end of her hair and frowning. She didn't say anything, but I knew she was thinking that her dad must have made a mistake. There was no way the new boy could be dangerous or a criminal. Not when he was the same size as us and had just run away from bullies and a real war. Mr. Thompson had taught us all about wars last year. It had been a special year for wars, and Mrs. Sanders said it was our duty not to forget about them. We learned about red poppies and how they were the most important flower because they grew on soldiers' graves, and about how lots of countries had joined up to fight in the very first war. The upper years did an assembly about it, and we went on a special day trip to the Tower of London where the Queen keeps her crown, because that's where millions of red poppies had been put in the gardens and stuck on the walls. Mr. Thompson said we should never forget how many people had died in wars to save us, but I can't remember long numbers, especially ones that keep going up all the time. But I'll never forget that castle. It had looked like it was bleeding. And later on that day, a man who knew all about the first big war gave us an extra special lesson inside the castle. His name was Officer Denny. I remember him because his name rhymed with my Uncle Lenny's. Everyone liked him because he was funny and knew everything there was to know about bombs and uniforms and a sad place called Flanders Fields. He picked me and Michael to try and hold up a rucksack that was the same size and weight as a real soldier's rucksack, but it was so big and heavy that we couldn't even lift it up off the ground. Remembering Officer Denny's rucksack made me wonder if the new boy had to carry lots of heavy things in his rucksack when he was running away. Maybe that's why it looked so old and dusty. He still didn't have a new one, but that week he had started to wear the school uniform. He must have found the new shirt and jumper itchy because he kept pulling at the collar whenever he thought no one was looking. That day the bus to school was late and got stuck in so much traffic that the driver let everyone get off early. We had to run half the way, and by the time we got to the playground, the bell had started ringing. I was hot and sweaty and feeling icky when we got into class, so I didn't realise that everyone was quieter than usual. But after a minute or so, I noticed that Pavinda and Dean, who were clever at everything and sat at the front of the class, kept looking over their shoulders. At first I thought they were looking at me because my face was still red, but then I heard Pavinda say, "Wonder who she is." I turned around and saw a grown-up sitting in Clarissa's seat. And not just any old grown-up, but one who was talking to the new boy. And the new boy was talking back to her. I poked Josie in the arm and said, "Look." Josie turned around and whispered, "Where's Clarissa?" We looked around the class and saw that Clarissa was sitting at the end of our row on Felicity and Natasha's table. She looked much happier. "Hurry up and settle down, please," said Mrs. Khan as she picked up the register. "Before we head to assembly, I wanted to introduce someone very special to you, but let's make sure you're all here first." After she had finished calling everyone's name, Mrs. Khan said, "Now class, I want you to say good morning to Ms. Hemsley, our new class assistant. Miss Hemsley stood up and smiled at everyone. "Good morning, Miss Hemsley," we all said. Half the class shouted it out and the other half said it quietly, as if they weren't sure Mrs. Khan had given them the right name to say. I shouted it out. I like shouting out new names. It makes them feel more real. Mrs. Hemsley smiles and said, "Good morning, everyone." Miss Hemsley will be helping Ahmed with his lessons from now on. If we're very lucky, in a few weeks, she will be helping Ahmed do a presentation about his hometown and how he feels about being here in London. Everyone turned to stare at Mrs. Hemsley as she nodded and smiled and then sat back down. "She looks nice," whispered Josie. "I like her scarf." I looked back over my shoulder because I liked the scarf Mrs. Hemsley was wearing on her head too. It looked like a silver river and it had a diamond pin clipped onto one of the sides that looked like a star. She had one of those smiles where the person smiling never shows any teeth, but I liked it, and her eyes looked like they'd been drawn around with thick black pencil, which made them look bigger and more interesting. The new boy seemed to like her too, and when she sat back down, she whispered something to him and patted him on the back, which made him nod. I felt happy for him. He had someone to talk to, and he didn't have to sit next to Clarissa anymore. It's much nicer to sit next to someone who isn't really trying to get away from you all the time and has a diamond pin in her scarf. All that day, the new boy did his lessons at the back of the class, and at break time and lunchtime, he went to seclusion as usual. But maybe because Miss Hemsley was with him, he didn't look at the ground so much and seemed more interested in everything we were doing. I caught him staring at me and Josie twice before lunchtime and 3 whole times in the afternoon, and I was sure he wanted to be friends with us now. At home time, he waited just as we always did by the gates, but this time all of us had something to give him. Josie had saved her chocolate yogurt pudding from her lunchbox for him specially, and Michael and Tom had the big bag of sweets and the banana their mums and dads had told them to save. Today I had an apple to give him because the school canteen had run out of oranges, but it was okay because Tom had given me a sticker of a whale to put on it, so it was still very special. As we were waiting, I crossed my fingers and secretly hoped that Miss Hemsley would come out with the new boy too, because since she could speak to him properly, she would be able to ask him some of the 11 questions that I had. The playground had started to empty by the time the new boy finally came out, holding both Miss Hemsley's and Mrs. Khan's hands. As they made their way over to the woman in the red scarf, Michael whispered, "Come on." I could tell he was excited because his eyes had gotten wider. Michael's eyes always get wider when he can't wait to do something. We all ran over to the new boy and gave him our gifts. "This is from me," said Tom, holding out the large bag of sweets like it was a trophy. There was a cola bottles in there, and flying wispies, and some toffee melts too. "And this is from me," said Josie, holding out the chocolate pudding. "It's my favourite." This is just a banana, but look," said Michael, turning it over to show the new boy the row of stickmen he had drawn on it. "And this is from me," I said, holding out an apple. The new boy looked up, his arms full, and gave us each a happy nod. I could tell it was a happy nod, and not just an ordinary nod, because even though his mouth wasn't smiling, his lion eyes looked happy. Miss Hemsley bent down and said something in a foreign language into the new boy's ears. He nodded and then, looking up at us, said very slowly, "Thank you, friends." Josie, Michael, Tom and me nodded and beamed, and then all at once started talking. I'm going to pause there. Okay, bye.